Hello, I'm in the beautiful Villingen in Schwarzwald, and I get this question so often on Instagram: how do I build a solid technique? I've been also asked in my new Facebook group, so I thought I'll do a video on this and cover the most important steps when it comes to building a solid technique on the piano. The first thing is quite obvious, but you have to strengthen your fingers and you have to make them quite independent. What do I mean by that? We have several joints in our fingers, right? We have this first joint here, we have this one, the second one, and we have this third one. And you have to know how to use each joint for each passage. And you have to come to a hand technique that is very natural on the piano. You know, it's not right that you have to play with curled fingers, but it's also not right that you have to play with flat fingers. It's really up to the piece and the passage, and you have to learn that you can strengthen your fingers so you can have the right technique for each passage. And you also have to make your fingers more independent so that, for example, when you move your fourth finger, the others don't move with you all the time, or you know that if you play with other fingers that the thumb is not stiff, etc. Because in the beginning, you know, it might not disturb you, but if you don't have the right independence for your fingers, that will be a problem much later down the road. So it's important to realize these things very early in your practice, already in the first years that you do. Otherwise, you know, it will take you much longer later to also recover from those mistakes. So that's why it's important to build the right finger strength and independence. Then what I've also talked about in other videos is that it's super important that you choose pieces on your level and you try to solve technical problems that are on your level. It doesn't make sense to practice Liszt sonata and to practice the octaves in Liszt sonata if you have problems playing a C major scale really fast, for example. Yeah, you have to really choose the problems that are on your level, or a little bit above your level, but not way above your level and also not too easy, right? But that's very rarely the case. So you have to choose pieces that are either exactly on your level or just a little bit above your level. And you need a mentor who tells you exactly what these pieces are, because if you're a beginner or an amateur pianist, even if you're not a professional pianist and you plan to do so, then you probably have difficulties, you know, evaluating the real difficulty of a piece. That's where you also need help to find the right pieces that will help you to improve your technique. Because what happens if you have a piece that is way too difficult, right? It's far ahead, then you won't be able to solve the technique, and you will compensate that technique with some other movement. You know, you might use your arm, you know, you might get stiff, try to solve it with force. There are several possibilities, and these things, you know, they turn to real problems later down the road. So if you have something that is just a little bit above your level, you can actually handle these things, and that will also motivate you to go even further, and you will actually improve your technique. That's super important here. Then of course you have to practice scales and also arpeggios, but you don't have to practice all keys up and down every single day. That's simply a waste of time. What you have to do is instead you have to focus on the groups and the transfer from one group to the other. What do I mean? For example, if you have a scale, a major or minor scale, you usually have groups 1, 2, 3 and 1, 2, 3, 4. And you have the thumb movement. The thumb movement is difficult, so you have to practice how to get from one group to the other group. But it's not difficult to play da 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 da. This is something that almost everyone can do. So you have to not practice all scales up and down, but you have to tackle this problem. The same is true for arpeggios, for example. You have a group 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, da 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 da, right? Or 1, 2, 4. And you have to also tackle the thumb movement there, which is actually the problematic part, rather than wasting time practicing all scales up and down, right? That is a mistake that I see very often, that people practice scales all the time and actually don't improve because they just practice up and down and they don't really focus on the problem. What about studies? Yeah, also there it's important that you choose studies that are on your level. You know, there are easier studies for classical period from Czerny, yeah, also other composers, but from my experience, Czerny's exercises have been the best, but not all of them. You know, I mean, he wrote so many pieces and not all of them are really useful. So it's important to pick a few that are, you know, the right things for you. It depends on what your challenges are, and later on, from my experience, Chopin etudes are very good for learning technique. Obviously Liszt, Rachmaninoff, Debussy, you know, you name it. Those are very difficult studies, but the ones by Chopin because they handle one problem at a time, are much better for actually developing technique and for solving different problems. That's why I advise you to master Chopin etudes, but as you know, you should do it with scales, not just practice them up and down, but also use specific exercises for each etude that will help you to master the etude from, you know, really from within, that you really have the technique to play it and that you just don't try to solve it with force or other movements compensating, you know, the lack of technique. That's key, and you can always accompany that with some etudes by Czerny. Also in the beginning, you know, you might even choose some simpler etudes. There are some from some piano schools which are really helpful. So you should practice etudes, but never more than 1 or 2 at a time, accompanying your pieces. Also there, don't practice too much of this. It will only be a waste of time if you don't do it correctly. So you see, yeah, the biggest point of your daily practice should be your pieces, and you should also practice your technique with your pieces. You know, once you have solved specific scenarios, you have solved your strength, dependence, you basically know how to play scales and arpeggios, you do practice etudes, you should also focus on the technique in your pieces, because that's where you need it, right? If there's a difficult jump, then you have to practice jumps. If you have thirds, you have to practice thirds. But it doesn't really make sense to practice these things all day up and down if you have already pieces where there are things that are challenging for you, because that's where you need your technique, right? So you have to find a practice plan where you can actually focus on these things, and you need tools that will help you to solve these things. That is key here, that you really spend most of the time with your pieces, because let me define again what technique is. Technique is the ability to express what you want. So you have a piece that expresses something, and then you need technique in order to make that happen. Nothing else and nothing more, nothing less. Yeah, that's technique. So if you just practice scales all the time, jumps, thirds, sixths, that might look fancy, you know, you might be able to tell other people, I practice so much of technique, but let's be honest, you know, it doesn't really help you so much in your pieces, even if you can play, you know, octaves, scales or jumps, whatever. If you have, you know, difficult chromaticism in your piece, it doesn't really help you. Even if you have practiced that months ago, you might have already forgotten it. So let's focus on the pieces, especially if you don't have so much time for practice, right? If you have 5 to 10 hours a week, but not much more, that's usually what, you know, you have at hand as an amateur pianist or as a professional. But even, you know, myself included, I don't practice technique so much. I practice right now around 15 to 20 minutes usually a day. That's it. Yeah. Then I go to the pieces and I practice my technique there, right in the pieces, you know, because every piece has something challenging. You just have to find it, identify it, find the right strategy, right exercises, execute it, and your technique is solved. And you also build your technique on a daily basis in your pieces. That being said, if you also want to find out what the missing links are to your technique, what actually the causes are, because sometimes you have symptoms, you know, you feel, I have tension, or you feel somehow I cannot get that fast, or, you know, you simply are stuck in your pieces, but you don't really know the cause. If you're not an expert, you can do a free piano lesson with me, where we will analyze your situation, an analysis. I would also call it an analysis session. So we actually look what your key problems are, how you can solve that with your practicing. And usually after this session, people want to work with me just because they have found out that it's super useful. Yeah, it's an unfair advantage over all the other amateur pianists or future pianists if you use my piano mastery system, and that's why people want to work with me. But if you don't want to do that, if you just want to have this practice analysis and find out what you need to do, that's absolutely fine. So sign up at aaronpilsner.com/academy, and we talk to each other very soon and find out what you need for your practice. Take care. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and we see each other again in the next video. Bye bye.